Rudy Husny, former advisor in the Harper government, our political analyst today. Rudy, I know today we got some details on the King Charles and Queen Camilla, who are going to be coming, of course, next week when Parliament gets back in session. Any thoughts on that?
I don't know if you were celebrating Victoria Day yesterday or the Journée des Patriotes, but yes, we are going to be all about the royal family next week with the visit of the King. We hear that the horses are getting settled with carriages, and that's how the King is going to enter Parliament. Those are some information that we learned today for the throne speech. So yes, they're arriving. We're just D-minus 6 days before the visit. And yes, he's going to pronounce the throne speech in the Senate. So we'll see what happens next week, how much he's going to talk about, obviously, the sovereignty of Canada. But just for the benefit of our listeners, he's not the one writing the speech. It's obviously the Prime Minister and the government. He's just reading the words of the government.
Okay. Look, I want to touch on something, and I just saw this earlier today, and I don't know if you did. Pierre Poilievre calling out this Liberal government for its condemnation of Israel. This was something done in conjunction with France and the UK. Have you seen this?
Yes, I've seen that.
What do you make of Pierre Poilievre actually, talking about this now at this point?
But, I mean, it's very interesting because during the campaign, there was kind of a different tone when it comes to Israel and Palestine. And you can see now there's a kind of a shift from the government. The statement that was issued yesterday from the Carney government with France and the UK, also saying that there may be possible retaliation to Israel. That's something that we haven't heard in the past, sanctions to Israel when it comes to what's happening in Gaza. So there's a kind of a change of the position of the government when it comes to Israel. So that's why I believe it's interesting, because that's not something that was discussed, especially during the campaign.
Yeah. I wonder, though, when I said Pierre Poilievre, you imagine now, because he's waiting and he's not going to be, of course, in the House until there's eventually that by-election held. Is this the kind of thing you would expect to see? You would expect he'd lay low now, or is he going to be out there just like he would be if he was leading the party?
No, I think he's going to continue. He's going to continue to do a lot of pressers, I expect, especially, on terms of the Canada-U.S. relationship, especially in terms of the finances, in terms of budgeting and all of that. So you can expect Pierre Poilievre to continue to play his role. He's still the leader of the party, even if he's not the leader in the House of Commons. But yes, he will use Parliament Hill to do pressers, so you can expect him in the news.
So we found out today as well there will be the first cabinet retreat. This is happening at Meech Lake.
Yes.
What are you expecting to come from that, if anything?
My advice for the Carney government is to have a little bit more discipline, because last week, especially during their first cabinet meeting, there was a lot of confusion. For example, you can hear Prime Minister Carney saying that, yes, he's open to pipeline, for example. He said it also during the campaign. And all of a sudden, after the first cabinet meeting, you hear Stephen Guilbeault, the Quebec lieutenant, who's not the natural resource minister, and all of a sudden, who's not the environmental minister, but all of a sudden jumping in and saying, oh, no, we don't need pipeline. So you can see that, for example, those are the kind of things that you want to avoid, especially in the new government. You need to make sure there's what we call a message discipline, and that certain ministers stick to their portfolio and do not answer, for example, questions that is not their responsibility. Because, for example, there's a lot of confusion. There was also a lot of confusion last week on the budget, for example. First, we hear from the Finance Minister, François-Philippe Champagne, that there was not going to be a budget in 2025. The budget will only be in 2026, and that they were going to table an economic update in the fall. And finally, on Sunday in Rome, Prime Minister Carney did kind of reverse the position and said, no, we will have a budget in the fall. So those are the kind of things that you basically need to discuss behind closed doors. And now, after, when everybody agrees, everybody basically sticks to the line, because it doesn't give a good example, a good start for a government when you have confusing messages, especially on pipelines or on finances.
Let me ask you this. So you brought up François-Philippe Champagne and that statement, which was later, of course, changed by Mark Carney when he was in Rome just a couple of days ago. I have Carlos Leitao on the show coming up just after the 5:30 news. Have you heard anything, because we discussed this a couple of weeks ago when his cabinet was appointed, as to Carlos Leitao not having been chosen? Have you heard anything about what happened?
No, but it's a big disappointment, and a lot of people don't understand, because when you look at the pedigree, when you look at the experience of Carlos Leitao, who's a former finance minister, who has the experience, who was able to balance a budget, and knowing that he had a close relationship with Mark Carney, everybody was expecting that first he would be a minister, and all of a sudden, he was left out of the list. So it is very, very strange, especially with his experience and with his age. You would ask himself, why did he get into politics again, not to be a minister and to be a backbencher?
All right, which is a question, of course, that I will be asking when we have him on. Last thing I want to bring up, I asked our audience about this today. Canada Post, it's kind of here we go again. Potentially Friday at midnight, yet another strike, although it's really not another strike. It's a continuation of the first strike going back, of course, to Christmas. But this, for a brand new government now having to face a situation like this, how do you fix this?
But I mean, it's going to be the first real test of Mark Carney and his government. Are they going to bring, again, a special law or a special part to say, look, you cannot go on strike because it's, for example, either in the social services or because it's going to hurt the economy, basically using the same argument that was used in late in November to basically say, go back to the negotiating table. Because, look, we already have the U.S. tariff. We already have the Canada-U.S. relationship. We're already worried about the economy. This is not the time, again, to have another strike. The numbers are very clear. Every day there's a strike, the Canadian economy can lose up to $1 billion a day. So I think that it's very, very important. It's very important for the Prime Minister Carney to react very quickly on it, because he cannot just let it go again, because it's going to hurt the economy, and it kind of set the tone for his government in terms of if he thinks that the economy is a priority or not.
So I would ask you then, based on what you just said, do you expect that Mark Carney, and again, this will be his first, if you want to call it conflict, to have to handle, do you expect he will act like that and say, no, this is not going to happen? What do you expect he will do?
That would be my advice, because, again, if they just say, okay, they let the strike go for a week or 2 weeks and nothing gets settled and there's no bargaining, after we're going to go back to the same point and we would have lost 2 weeks of economic activity. If there needs to be a reform when it comes to Post Canada and Canada Post, because, yes, they're losing money. Yes, people are not sending as much letters as they used to. But at the same time, we cannot allow the economy, especially because there's kind of a line between big cities, Montreal, Quebec City, Toronto, and Vancouver, but also people living outside of those big cities, which they rely on, for example, Canadian Mail, on certain things. So we cannot allow this to happen. So I do believe that I expect Mark Carney to act, but if he doesn't, it's going to be again the same thing, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks before they act again to go back to the same, which is stop the strike and go back to the bargaining table. So
you assume, Mark Carney, your advice would be you better handle this quickly, and the last thing you want to do is have this happen to your brand new government as soon as you become, officially in the House of Commons.
Exactly, because it's going to be an issue, and look, people are going to say, look, we need that, especially with what's happening, because that's another burden on Canadian businesses, and with the U.S. tariffs, they don't need that, and they don't need at this time. They don't need it at this time.
Rudy Husny, thank you so much. Appreciate it.